Hi, everyone. This is your host, Aram Melkoumov, and you're listening to another episode of the Product Innovation Show. Every week, the guests that we have on our show share their stories and wisdom on how to ship great product. Taylor Sell is joining me today. He's the director of product at Trainual, a SaaS platform that changes the way small businesses onboard, train, and scale teams. Previously, Taylor launched multiple products in print, automotive, and service-based industries, and loves writing on Medium about product teams in early stage startups. Taylor, thank you for coming on today. It's a pleasure to have you on our show.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here today, and I can't wait to dive into some of the questions you have.
Awesome. So the first question I have is, we've been following you guys, and we noticed that through the development of the company, you guys went through a big stage of hypergrowth. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory of that growth? What happened? How did you go from one point to another point?
Yeah. So great question. So I joined the Trainual team about a little over 2.5 years ago. And so when I joined the team, it was myself. We had one product designer and 2 in-house engineers. So really, really small team, really scrappy team, right? But that's how we kind of started. And over the past, 2 years, we've grown exponentially from the people side of things and just like what we're doing as product design and engineering organization. We have just shy of 30 engineers now. We have a team of 6 product managers and we have a team of 6 designers as well. So in a very short amount of time, like we've grown exponentially as far as the people that are in the organization, and our investment in product and design at Trainual has been pretty awesome to see that. So that's kind of where we were at. That's where we're at today. And yeah, anytime you grow that quickly, there's a lot of good things that happen, and there's a lot of bumps in the roads along the way. So I'm sure we'll uncover some of those in our chat today here.
Yeah, that's great. It's some really impressive growth over that period of time. And what was your role in your transformation? Did you start off as a product manager? When you joined, did you start off as a director of product?
Yeah, Yeah, great question. When I joined, I came in as the director of product, but I was basically doing all of the IC work as well as running the product and design teams, the team of 2, right? And so that's kind of where I started. And then my role is kind of transitioned more into just kind of like the leadership side of things, strategy, long-term direction of the product. And then really kind of bringing people in to kind of facilitate some of the, the PM responsibilities, the design team responsibilities as well. So, I was, basically the person to help hire and bring the right people in, structure the team, figure out how we want to operate as an organization, as a product department. That's where we're at today. So yeah, pretty exciting.
So through this growth that you guys went through, what were some of the biggest growth pains?
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing was just how the different teams operated. So initially when we started, we were a very horizontal product department, right? So no matter where you were, like you could touch any part of the product. So maybe one quarter or 1 month, you're working on our trial flow. The next month, you're working on like how people document processes in the product, right? And so you could really touch anything. We were really nimble. So no matter what came up or what we needed to address, we were able to put the necessary people and teams in those places to build out certain functionality or experiences. And as we've grown, what we really started to see is people were stepping on each other's toes, where it's like, hey, I'm trying to build this part or this feature out, and another team is trying to do something very similar. And so the overhead necessary to coordinate and figure out what everyone was working on, when they were working on it, when we were rolling certain things out, it was one of those pain points where it's like, hey, this is not going to scale. Like we are hiring people constantly. We're continuing to hire people. Like this is not something that's going to work for the long term, and we need to kind of adjust that. So, that was probably one of the biggest things that has happened over the past year, where we reorged, we restructured, we revamped our processes, what teams are focusing on to really eliminate some of that overhead and some of that friction between different squads.
It's very interesting. So I'm really curious to know, how did you go about restructuring the team, or what changed in like the dynamics of your product teams?
Yeah, so good question. Like the biggest thing was, like I said earlier, it was very horizontal, right? So you could touch any part of the product depending on where the need of the business was or what our customers were telling us. And the biggest shift we went to is actually like we verticalized the teams. And so the term we use internally is called product lines. And so basically you'd have different product teams or product squads, and they would own a very specific part of the product, right? So we'd have a team that's dedicated to the people experience. So that's things like our directory or org chart or roles and responsibilities, anything to do with people in your organization. We had a team dedicated to that and building that out in the product. Other teams we had a growth team. So they were focused on the trial experience, getting people activated, getting people to convert. We had a team that was dedicated to documentation. So how you write processes, how you write policies. And so the big thing there was like we verticalized so that not only were you not stepping on other teams' toes, right, but you're also able to plan for the future of that, area of the product that you were owning, right? So you could really put a strategy in place. You could really understand the pain points and problems with that area of the product. We limited and we tried to remove as much context switching as possible so that the team is really able to just be heads down and execute against that strategy or that direction of the product or product line that they were actually owning, right? And so, obviously with that transition, we put people in different roles and different positions to help them shine and to kind of build with their strengths and to really execute against that verticalization of the teams and what they worked on.
That's interesting. With the team that you had in place and like the new team members that you brought on during this verticalization, focusing on the product lines, what were some things that you did in order to help get buy-in from those team members in terms of the shift that they had to maybe change in terms of working within a product line? Like, because I'm sure some people had preferences or maybe, requests that they wanted to have. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, really, I think it really boiled down to just being super transparent about where we were going, why we were going that way, and then just giving people a safe space to ask questions. And so for me and for my team, it was really just saying like, okay, here's why we're making this transition. Here's the problems that we're running into that aren't scaling. Here's the direction we want to go. Here's how that's going to work. Here's how you are going to be impacted. And so, I spent a lot of time sitting down with everyone individually in one-on-one conversations just to say, hey, like this is why we're doing this, but I understand this impacts you. If you have questions or concerns or things you want to talk through, like let's talk through that because I want to make sure we're addressing those before we decide to go this direction. And it really comes down to making sure you're creating that safe space, whether that's in a specific department or group setting where people can ask questions together as a team, or if it is that one-on-one, direct conversation where people feel comfortable, you need to create that space so that people can get their concerns, they can get their questions out there, and you can address them. And then when you get into those, larger like company-wide communication, or you're communicating something across all of product design and engineering, it really becomes more of a celebration where it's like, hey, this is the direction we're going. Everyone's bought in. Everyone's super excited about this. And it's like we're rallying everyone together for that transition and getting people excited about that. But it really starts with just making sure people have that space to ask questions and address their concerns early on, so they feel comfortable with that transition.
Okay. How long did this whole process take? Because the reason why I want to ask is I'm sure there was some fires or I don't know, some, big things that maybe happened that maybe didn't go as planned during this reorg.
Yeah.
Can you share?
Yeah, I can. So I'll talk a little bit about when the conversation started happening. And so I think the whole process probably took start to finish, from like the conversation starting to actually, we're obviously following that model now, probably like 6 months. And, depending on the, what company you're working in or like what size of organization, if you're a startup, you're probably like, hey, that's pretty quick, or that's, maybe it's too long. Large organizations, it might take much longer. Right. But, really, I think from start to finish, it was about 6 months, just saying like, okay, this is the hiring plans. This is where we're going to be, growing the teams. This is our, headcount planning for all of next year. And what are some of the problems we're going to run into? What are some of the problems the team has brought up as far as how we're operating right now, and where are some of those bottlenecks or inefficiencies? And we talked through that. And then from there, we figured out, well, what is a structure that addresses those concerns? supports the hiring plan for the future. So when we bring these people in, they're not coming into chaos. They're coming into something that has a little bit more structure and direction, and they can, hit the ground running. And then all the way down to the actual execution itself and making sure those transitions happened and everyone's into the new teams and we're operating the new way. But there was definitely, headaches along the way as well. I'm more than happy to talk about some of those if you'd like as well. Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing is like, you can have the plan, you can have the date, you can communicate everything out, everyone can be bought in, but the execution is super, super important, right? And so for us, when we hit that transition phase and people were moving around, people were wrapping up projects, people were figuring out like, okay, this is an ongoing project, like someone else has to come in and take this on. Like, how do I prepare my work for that individual to take it over? Like, that's the very in the weeds, like, part of that transition. And so, as a leader, like, that's something that I kind of missed. Like, it's not something that I supported my team on as well as I possibly could have. And we kind of, not say we paid for it. I think the team really rallied around that and did a great job kind of working through some of those, some issues in the transitioning. But like after the transition happened, it was like we had to go heads down and figure out, okay, where are some of these design files, where are some of the stories, like what context we need to share with this individual. And it took time to ramp people up on that, right? And so being able to prepare for that, even at the highest possible level, and then all the way down to like the minutia of the stories or the teams or the meeting cadences or like the design files, like all of that is super, super important when you are transitioning individuals and what everyone is working on. So that was a huge takeaway of something that obviously I think we could have done a lot better. It's a lesson learned and something we'll, in the future, if there are reorgs or transitions, we'll definitely handle it much better.
So I was going to be, my next question is that if you were to do this again, what specifically would you do differently, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, well, I mean, outside of like having the clear, I think, guidelines for all the individuals to know what is being handed off to other members of the team, or that specific transition plan. Obviously, that is something that I think could be improved and how I would change it. The other thing too is like, it's really important to remember that we're all human beings, right? And so from a business perspective, from a operational perspective, sometimes you can get detached from the team and the relationships that they've built. And so it's really easy to say like, this is the direction we go, this is why we're going this direction, this is why it makes sense for the business and the teams. But product design and engineering are such a tight knit group of individuals. Like, they really go through the thick of it. Like, product management and just working in software and working in tech is not an easy job, right? Like, it's very, very challenging, right? And so when you go through those trials or tribulations, or whatever you want to call them, like, that network or that bond that you build with your team is super, super important. And so going back to my original point about like, we're all human, like when you are changing people and moving them to different teams, like you're breaking that relationship, right? And in some cases, like friendships, right? Like, these are people that work together constantly. They're people that work out, they hang out outside of work as well, right? And so that's one of those things where knowing that and taking that into consideration and allowing those new relationships to be built with those new teams and with those new individuals, like, that takes time. So it's one of those things where like doing like team building events or having people get together before the transition happens so they can kind of build that working relationship is definitely something that I would have changed as well. So that when they get into those teams, they understand how people work, they understand how people operate, and they've kind of built some of that relationship, and so they can really kind of hit the ground running. So that's one of the other things I would have definitely created more space for to build those relationships before the transition happened.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
The next series of questions I have is more going to be around product development. So, there's other product managers, directors of product, obviously know this, but sometimes like you might not always have the time to go and speak to all the customers that you want to speak. So it's an unfortunate, restriction or circumstance, obviously, if it comes to that. But there's always a time and a place in order to do that. But oftentimes, what we've seen is that decisions need to be made without having the opportunity to speak to those customers. So It could be around a specific deadline or whatnot. So when you guys have been building your product and you look at your product roadmap, how did you go about, or have you had to skip kind of any customer talks with the products that you've been developing? And if you did, how did you go about that?
Yeah, that's so I'd be lying to you if I said that I never skipped a customer call when I'm building something out. So it is, especially in startups, right? When you're moving super fast, you're trying to get things out there, you're trying to hit deadlines, like you have to make certain concessions. And unfortunately, sometimes that is, the necessary validation or customer calls to really understand if you're building the right thing or building the right experience to, ship, right? And so, if that is the circumstance that you're working through as an organization, it's one of the things that you're ultimately just increasing the level of risk, right? Like you're just increasing that you might be wrong. And if you're okay with that as an organization, like you're okay with the level of risk that you're introducing or just the uncertainty that you have, like it's okay to maybe skip some of those things if there's alignment around like, hey, we don't have all the validation. It's okay if we're wrong, but we need to move really quickly. We needed to get something out there. And so there's alignment and buy-in from the entire organization, from the team, if that is like when push comes to shove that you have to go through, right? In addition to that, like if you are in those types of circumstances, I think it's important to, it's not just hitting the deadline and delivering the feature or delivering the solution, but like what were you ultimately trying to achieve? Like what was the outcome of building that feature, right? And so there's a level of accountability that if you want to move super quick or you want to increase the level of like risk tolerance or what you're okay with, it's still important to keep yourself accountable at the end of the day to say, hey, we were trying to, let's say, increase trial signups or increase revenue, or we were trying to get greater adoption around this specific feature. So we rolled out an iteration to it. Like you need to understand why you're building that feature and what is the outcome you want to achieve. Because then when you ship it, you can go back and say, hey, we missed the mark. But we learned from that, and now we can pivot or now we can iterate and kind of build upon what we actually got out there. So at the end of the day, even if you don't get in front of customers or you have a rough deadline, it's important to understand what you're trying to achieve and keeping yourself accountable, keeping the team accountable to those decisions so that you can learn and build upon that. But for kind of what we do at Trainual and how we try and mitigate that is just create the time and the space to talk with customers and talk with customers constantly. So it starts with, just me as a leader and instilling that in my team, that like validation and talking with customers and understanding their pain points, understanding if we're solving the issues that they have, like that is super important. And you need to create the time and the space for your team to be able to actually do that, right? And so, as product managers, as people in product, like we are juggling so many different things. So if you really don't carve out time to have those types of conversations or sit down with customers, you will fill it with a million other things that are on your plate, right? So for us, we do customer call days every single week. So we actually block off 6 hours on Fridays. Currently it's every Friday, where our team just has, you can't schedule over it, you can't get out of it, like that's your time to talk with customers. And so that way we're continually giving the team the time and the space to have those calls, and we're consistently doing those. So when we do have a deadline change or something does come up, like we've had ample time to talk with customers to obviously prepare for that. And it helps us mitigate risk along the way. But yeah, that's really what we've been doing. It's been helpful for the team to carve that out. And we have a lot of other members. So like we have like our CX team or customer facing teams, like they now know that they can send customers to us knowing that we'll talk with them if they have product feedback or whatever. So a lot of the other departments and people that are interfacing with our customers, they're helping send customers over to us to reduce the overhead of our product team and like setting those calls up. But it really all starts with just carving out the time and the place for your team to have those conversations. And not just have them, but consistently have them every single week.
It's great to hear, because a lot of companies that I've spoken to in the past, they don't give their PMs that type of privilege. So, was there a specific inflection point that you, as a leader, or your leadership team in the company said, "This is important. We need to do this consistently"? otherwise we will fail?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if there was like a specific inflection point. It's something that when I joined the Trainual team, it's something that I brought in. Like, this is part of our discovery process. This is how we are going to operate as a product organization. And I think the biggest thing for the team and how we kind of pieced everything together is like, okay, we've got so many different things going on. We don't have the time and the place for it, right? We don't have time to do all these customer calls. And so that's what really pushed us to say, like, we need to dedicate, time every single week that is purely dedicated to just customer calls, right? I think just in general, any product organization, when you're building things, the biggest question is like, are people using what we're building? Is it providing any type of value? And if the answer is like, I don't know if people are using it, I don't know if it's providing value, like, you can be spending a ton of time and money across not just product and design, but engineering as well, to build things that really aren't going to help move the business forward. And so there's an immediate ROI as an organization or as a leadership team to say, well, do we want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building something and we could be wrong? Or do we want to take a little bit of time for a couple individuals to do some of that validation early on? And then the chance of success, or the chance of building something that's actually going to be valuable to our customers, is going to go much, much higher. And so if you think about it in that way, and the money you'll spend on a product that fails versus spending a few hours up front or a day up front to make sure the success of that feature or product goes up significantly, it's a no-brainer, I think, for me and for any product leader, really.
No, for sure. And so I'm just curious now, if you could share with us those Friday sessions, 6-hour block times. The PMs obviously have to prep for those days.
Yeah.
What are some of the questions or scenarios that they form in advance, or hopefully not on the day of, but like in advance, which is like either a hypothesis that they create, or whatever the problem validation that they want to determine? How much time did they spend every week just preparing versus doing the calls and then reflecting on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the way we've kind of structured the calls is that it's not only PMs, but our designers are there as well. And so they are typically trading off as far as who's running the calls, who's taking notes, and then they'll kind of take their notes at the end of the call and synthesize, so they can see like, hey, here's what I heard, here's what you heard. And so we're building some of that prep and kind of debrief into those Friday customer call days, right? As far as prepping, like, the team will do that throughout the week leading up to the Friday, right? And so it can be like an hour here or 2 hours throughout the week leading up to the Friday customer call. But really what they're focusing on is dependent on what the team is trying to do. So it can be just a general conversation about like, what do you like about the product? Like, what's working, what's not working, any general feedback. It can be to your point about, hey, we have a hypothesis. We believe that if we build this feature, we'll see this type of outcome. And it's more of like problem discovery and just understanding, like, are we focusing on the right thing? Or it could be, throwing different prototypes in front of somebody for a usability test. Or maybe we shipped something recently and it's like, hey, you used our org chart recently, or you just used this feature. Hey, can we pick your brain about what you liked, what you didn't like, what was working, what wasn't working? So the team has a lot of freedom to figure out, okay, what do we need answers on? What do we need to get validation on? Or what do we need to kind of determine if like we built the right thing even post development? Like, they're adapting and changing the type of questions or calls that they're having based on the needs of their team and the customers that they're getting in on Fridays.
Okay. Very interesting. Thank you. I want to ask, follow-up question to that is, some of the companies that I've been speaking with sometimes have a lot of the big epics or their main feature sets that they want to roll out in the year broken out in quarters or sometimes in smaller frequencies. Mm-hmm. And so then they basically commit to those deliverables in that they want to ship. When your team has those conversations with your customers, how many, maybe in a quarter, how many conversations do you have which are related to new features that you guys want to develop versus testing features that were rolled out? And the reason why I ask, because I want to know, how do you plan out the commitments that you want to make around new features that you want to roll out on a quarterly, monthly basis. Just like the ratio, because, other, I think, product managers that are going to be listening to this call are really curious to know, like, what's like your release schedule, that is comfortable for the team to sustain without overburdening them with like existing obligations.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, so the way we do like planning here at Trainual is we have outcome-based roadmaps, right? And so we're saying, hey, we want to achieve this certain outcome within this given time period. And then the team is then working to figure out like what are the different features or different ideas that would help us ultimately achieve that by that specific time frame, right? And so that's kind of where it all starts. And then from there, having those customer calls or talking with customers, then understand like, well, is it something, it's a new problem that we're just not addressing well, or is it expanding upon what we already have in the product and building that to add more functionality or to make it a better experience or whatever the case may be, right? And so, leading up to the way the outcome-based roadmaps is like leading up to that, we'll have like the annual plan as far as what we're trying to achieve from the product side and the product department. And then the team will have time leading up to a quarter or leading up to the year to actually do that discovery and research. Primarily, we'll use a lot of those customer calls on Fridays to change a lot of those conversations to be more about like, where do we go? Do we build new functionality? Do we build, expand upon existing functionality? So, I really don't know if I have a good breakdown for you as far as like new functionality versus iterating on existing. It's a really good question. I think it depends upon, what we're hearing from the customers and where we want to go from like a product vision perspective, right? And so I don't know if I have a good percentage there, but I think part of it is understanding where you're trying to go for the quarter or for the year, and then really figuring out, well, what are the things that are going to help us achieve that? Is it new functionality or is it expanding upon existing? We use some tools and systems internally. Product board is a I guess I'll give them a plug, but basically that is a place for like all of the customer insights and feedback to come. And it's a repository for all of that. So when we get into our planning and kind of figure out like, well, what do we want to focus on? What are we going to try and do to actually hit some of these metrics or goals? Like we have a dedicated place where we can actually search and say like, okay, this part of the product is getting a ton of feedback. This thing is struggling, or we're not doing a good job with this. And that really kind of enables the team to figure out, okay, this is an area we can be focusing on. These are the questions we should be asking to customers. And that kind of opens up some of those opportunities for them to kind of invest in. But did I answer your question, or is there something?
No, that's great. Okay. I mean, other than product board, are there any kind of other solutions that you use to help you track or discover new product requests?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So product board is a great place to store all the information. We also record all of our conversations across the board. So recording in the sense of like a designer doing a research call or a PM, and that is also put into a repository that is keyword matched. So I can actually go look up any conversation in the past that the team has had about a specific idea or a specific problem. And now we can actually surface all of the conversations that we've had in the past about that specific area, right? And so that is also super helpful. The tool we use for that is called Grain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's actually something we implemented relatively recently. But it takes all of those conversations that are happening and making it all searchable, right? And so even our sales and marketing teams and customer facing teams, they'll start using that as well. So we can even start digging into, okay, this is a sales conversation where we couldn't close the deal because we didn't have this functionality, or we didn't do this thing or solve a use case that they were looking to use Trainual for, right? And so that really starts enabling the team to figure out what are the common themes that are coming up and have a dedicated place to pull those resources, not have to repeat the process every time we go into planning or every time we try and figure out what to build or where to spend our time.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard of Grain. I'll check it out. Cool. Last segment of the recording today is that we were trying something new, and they're fireside questions. The goal is like you have 1 to 2 minutes to answer some of these questions. There's a total of 4. So you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Okay. So the first fireside question is that a lot of companies don't have transparent product processes. I want to ask, why do you think this happens, and who needs to fix it, and how?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have to do a plug for Trainual because that is what our product does. We are a process documentation tool, and so at Trainual we have a great place to put our process and to document our process so people know how to operate if they have questions about how to run a certain part of the process or just learning the process. Like, we have a tool that teaches and trains people on that specifically, right? I think in regards to the question about, why are people not documenting their process? It's one of those things that I think if you have a very rigid process that you have to follow and it's very, very strict, it doesn't allow you to be nimble and pivot, right? It doesn't allow you to take new insights and go a different direction. Or you may be spending a ton of time doing upfront research or validation, when in reality, you could probably build something and get it out there much quicker, right? And so I think because of, depending on what you're working on and how your organization operates, like, it can be very fluid and it can change. And it also changes like as you add new people, as you scale the organization. Like, what worked when it was a 4-person team is not going to work when it's a 30-person team, right? And so I think because those changes and because those things adapt, it's kind of hard to really figure out like, well, how do we want to operate? What are some of the themes we want to use? What is the process that we do want to actually follow? And I think that's a hard thing to figure out, right? And I think that's probably why people don't spend the time and energy to actually invest in that process. So for us, and the way we've kind of handled that is we called it choose your own adventure, right? And so depending on how confident we are in something or how much data or insight we have on a specific problem or how to solve a problem, we'll actually go relatively quickly through our process, and we'll cut out some of the, the data requests or some of the additional research calls that we would typically do, just because we already have those insights and data points, so we can go much faster, right? But if there are things where it's a new insight or something happening in the market or it's a new problem, we'll do more exploratory discovery, right? So we'll spend more time validating it's worth solving. It's invest research calls into that and make sure that we're mitigating risk for the team and ultimately for the business as well. And so that's really kind of how we've done it. And it is a process that has to adapt. And it's something that, like, as a product leader, it is your job to help build that process out. I think it does fall on the product leader's shoulders to define that and not do it in a silo, but work with the team to figure out where are our strengths, where are some of our weaknesses, where are some of our bottlenecks, and then build a process that allows them to really thrive in that and not just do it, but do it really, really well and be able to repeat that process consistently, right? So that definitely falls on our shoulders as product leaders, but working with the team to identify how we want to operate, what do we want to live by, what principles do we want to follow, and then building a process that can adapt depending on the needs of the business and the customer.
Okay. Second question.
That was more than 2 minutes. I know. Sorry.
No, it was a good answer. Thank you. The second question is there's a lot of pressure in various product organizations that when a big customer comes along and wants a specific big feature being developed, it's a distraction. And so, how do you dig yourself out of the situation as a product leader?
So, first of all, I try not to dig the hole in the first place. And so usually, like, the general rule of thumb is like the 80-20 rule. And so if someone has a request or is bringing something to the table and I'm chatting with them, whatever the case is, like, what my job is to find out, is this going to solve a problem for like 80% of our customers? And if it's not, I'm very transparent up front to just say, like, hey, I want to hear where you're at, what you're thinking about, why we're thinking about this, how this is going to help, solve whatever problem it is in your organization. But I want you to be aware, like, we're going to build stuff that solves problems for all of our customers, not just an individual, right? So being very transparent about that up front is, it's a tough conversation to have, but I think people do appreciate that, to just be super upfront before you have them spend time and energy invested with you and figuring things out. And so the 80-20 rule is typically what I like to follow, but it's really your job then to figure out, well, what is the real problem that they're having, and does this apply to our broader customer base? And if it does, then it makes sense to potentially build that, right? And if it doesn't, this is probably not the right fit for where we're going as a product.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard conversation to have, and I don't know if that's a conversation you have or like somebody in your leadership team other than you has, but it's a tough one.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not easy for sure.
yeah, awesome. All right, third fireside question is: a lot of folks copy features from other competitors. It just happens all the time. What do they do? Like, why do they do it, and not focus just on their customers that they should be? And what should they do instead?
Yeah. So I call that the shiny object syndrome, whereas like there's this shiny object that a competitor just released. It looks really cool. It's super flashy. And then immediately everyone's attention goes to that and they just want to like go build it. Right. And so like if you're spending all of your time focusing on what everyone else is doing, your product is really going to start to become, it's going to be diluted, right? Because you don't have a clear path that like the core customer you want to go after, the core problem that you're trying to solve and do better than anybody else. And if you're spending all the time looking at what everyone else is doing and trying to repeat that, your product's not going to do any one thing or two things really, really well. You're going to do a bunch of things, but subpar, right? And so it's important to understand as a product leader, as even in product management, like who is our customer? Who are we trying to solve for? What is the problems that they have? And how do we solve those problems, 1,000 times better than anybody else in the market, right? And that should be your focus. It should be doing something so well that people can't reproduce it or people can't replicate that easy. And that's what's going to differentiate you in the market. That's what people are going to come to you as your one thing that you do incredibly. And that's why people are going to come, convert and pay you money ultimately. So it's really kind of shifting that mindset to say like, what's the one thing that we want to do better than everybody else? And really kind of avoiding that shiny object syndrome, because your competitors are going to do really cool stuff. They're going to put stuff out there that's great, but that shouldn't be a distraction. That shouldn't dilute that one or two things that you want to be better than anybody else, basically in the product. So yeah.
Very true. Don't get distracted by what other people are doing. I think is the rule there. Yeah. Last question. Thank you, Taylor. Is wanted to ask you about what your thoughts on about asking your users what you should build. How bad of an idea is it, and what should you do instead?
Well, first I'll say like just talking with customers is always great, right? It's never bad to talk with customers. I think it's how you frame the questions or how you actually approach that it's what matters the most, right? And so, it's I'll give you a quick example. So when we started the conversation today, you asked me how I was doing, and I was like, great, good, right? And it's human nature to just respond to somebody and say, I'm doing great, I'm doing good. And I could have a terrible day right now, or it could be a, maybe not a subpar day, right? And so it's human nature to try and appease people and trying to say, give them the answer that they want, right? And so if I came to you or I went to a customer, I was like, hey, do you want this integration or do you want this feature? 9 times out of 10, that person's going to be like, yes, I want it. Right? Because they want to make sure that you feel like you're being heard, that like you're bringing cool ideas to them. And so it's kind of like a biasy, it's kind of a trap that you get yourself into. Now, I said 9 times out of 10, you'll have that one person that just shoots you straight and they're like, terrible idea. No, I don't want this. Like those people are great. I love those people. I love talking about those people, but you don't always find them, right? And so it's really more about how you ask the question than it is like, do you want this feature, right? And so really it comes down to what is the problem that feature or that solution is trying to solve. And so always working your way back to the problem to say like, hey, does that solve the problem that you told us that you had? And that's one way of getting out of that. Like, yes, this is valuable to me, or yes, this is what I want. In addition to that, using scales as well. So for example, like if I put 2 solutions in front of you and I say, hey, on a scale from 1 to 5, how valuable would one of these solutions be to you and your organization? And if you came back and you said, hey, that's a 4 out of 5 or a 3 out of 5, it starts to allow me to dig into that and be like, well, what's missing from this solution, or what do we not have that we could be building that would get you to a 5 out of 5, right? And doing that with multiple customers and repeating that, you'll start to find common themes and trends. And that's how you really know that your solution or your feature is onto the right thing. But like a feature or a solution is a great way to start that conversation. But it's how you ask the question, how you bake it back to the original problem that customer had is what's most important there.
And just a follow-up question on this. I want to know when you go through the process and you're discussing a new feature with a customer, what kind of signifiers are you looking for as a product manager or designer enough times to determine the validity of building out that feature?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's usually, at least in my experience, it's like a rule of 5 to 10, right? And so if you're onto something and you're hearing the same thing about 5 times, you'll probably hear that from the additional people from 5 to 10 conversations, right? And so usually that's how many people we typically like to talk with, is say, let's talk with at a minimum 5 people. And if there are themes or is there any type of like consistency in those conversations, you're gonna probably start hearing the same stuff between, like I said, 5 to 10 customers, right? So that's typically what we're looking for as far as how many people to talk with and to kind of validate, what we're doing. I think the other thing too is like using things like the scale or the 1 to 5, like putting some sort of numerical value to something is also helpful as well, because you can aggregate all that together and say like, hey, we've got 4.5 out of 5s or whatever. That's high enough for us to feel confident that we will actually want to move forward. But usually you'll start hearing common themes after, 5 customer calls.
Okay. All right. Taylor, that was awesome. Thank you so much for all your wealth of knowledge that you shared with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in and supporting the show and following us on LinkedIn. Taylor, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to chat with you today.